If Beowulf is the foundational epic poem of England, why is it set in Denmark? This may have something to do with a kind of cultural identity crisis among the Anglo-Saxons of the 700s, a crisis also related to their attitude toward nature, perhaps. Accounts of the former warrior turned Anglo-Saxon saint named Guthlac show some parallels to the Beowulf poem. Taken together, the two documents suggest, along with other textual clues, that Beowulf was most likely written, like that saint's life, in the 700s in the realm of Mercia. Mercia's name literally means the mark or the borderland. The term mark in this old sense also can mean district or shire. This was the ancestral land that J.R.R. Tolkien saw as the home of his English ancestors. It was originally the borderland between the Celts and Anglo-Saxons, but then became the fertile heartland of Anglo-Saxon England. However, Mercia in the 700s had an identity problem. Its people were probably mainly still of Celtic background. Its culture had become Anglo-Saxon. Its church was the new, more Roman-derived church, distinguished from the older native Celtic church. Mercia, in many ways, was a colonial regime that needed a myth of identity. Did Beowulf help to provide that? Perhaps there's a view of nature that goes with Anglo-Saxon colonialism and its sense of religious mission that Bede's History of the English Church also provided in the 700s. The Anglo-Saxons felt they had been specially called to their faith by the mission from Pope Gregory that had arrived around the year 600 to convert the Anglo-Saxon realms. They viewed the native people, the Celts, and their church as living on the margins of both history and geography. Perhaps such cultural attitudes also involved a certain view of nature, informed by their Augustinian theology. St. Augustine of Hippo had emphasized original sin and fallen nature. The natural state for Augustine was not the same as for St. Anthony and the Desert Fathers, whose brand of monasticism seems to have influenced the Irish more. The Celtic otherworld came more from Antony's desert, the sea in which monks swam even while they struggled. The monsters threatening the hall from the natural world outside in Beowulf came more from the influence of St. Augustine and the status of the Anglo-Saxons as conquerors, well aware of being strangers in a strange land. The scholar Jennifer Neville has this to say of that difference. Old English poets appear not to have been inspired to use the representation of the natural world in the same way as Irish poets, even when describing similar circumstances of comfort and joy. Instead, Old English poets reserve the representation of the natural world for use as a force to oppose and test their saints' resolve and powers of resistance. For the Old English poet, the representation of the natural world helps to create the context of helplessness and alienation that motivates the seeking of God. For the Irish poet, the representation of the natural world creates the context of wonder and joy that surrounds the seeking of God. Margaret Goldsmith wrote, "The Irishman shows a typical interest in the small creatures, the birds and the fish and the domestic creatures, fire and cattle, whereas the English poet sweeps his gaze across the whole earth and the firmament."